The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street, in the quiet town of Willowbrook, Vermont, where autumn leaves painted the landscape in vibrant hues of red and gold. The tranquility of this middle-class neighborhood was suddenly interrupted by an unusual commotion that caught the attention of even the most discreet neighbors. A white ambulance pulled up in front of a modest two-story colonial home, its weathered blue paint and white trim speaking to decades of careful maintenance. From the vehicle emerged two uniformed paramedics pushing a collapsible stretcher. The scene might have seemed routine if not for the large German Shepherd positioned strategically at the front gate, his posture alert and protective, as if ready to prevent any unwelcome approach. Walter Garrison, a 76-year-old retired high school literature teacher with a deliberate speech pattern but remarkably sharp eyes, stood firmly inside his home, refusing to leave. His daughter, Meredith Garrison Powell, clutched a folder of medical documents, her manicured fingers betraying her obvious nervousness as she tried to reason with her father. "Dad, please," she insisted, her voice strained with a mixture of concern and frustration. "You can't stay here alone anymore. You've been forgetting things, leaving the stove on, getting lost in your own neighborhood. It's not safe." Despite her claims, Walter showed no evident signs of mental confusion. He appeared instead to be a man with stubborn conviction and the firm belief that he remained perfectly lucid. "I forgot where I put my reading glasses once. Meredith?" he replied calmly, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in classrooms. "That doesn't mean I need to be locked away in some facility where people wait to die." It was at this moment that the dog, aptly named Apollo after Walter's favorite figure from classical mythology, strengthened his protective stance. Each time the paramedics attempted to approach the door, Apollo emitted a low growl, his expression as serious as it was determined. No one managed to get past him. No command, distraction attempt, or treat offering succeeded in breaking the visible bond between the dog and his owner. Within minutes, neighbors had pulled out their phones. Martin Whitaker, the retired postal worker who lived across the street and had always been fascinated by neighborhood dynamics, began recording. His footage captured Apollo standing guard at the door, facing down the paramedics, while Meredith argued with her father, trying unsuccessfully to convince him to accept hospitalization. The video spread like wildfire within hours. Captions such as "Dog prevents forced hospitalization" and "Loyalty beyond reason" took over social media platforms. Comments were divided between support for Meredith, concerned about her father's well-being, and admiration for Apollo's gesture, which seemed driven by pure protective instinct. The viral nature of the case quickly attracted media attention. Within less than 48 hours, a crew from the local TV station was positioned outside the residence, interviewing neighbors, experts, and, reluctantly, Meredith herself, who now found herself at the center of a media storm she never anticipated. Some neighbors organized a small, peaceful protest with signs reading, "Let Walter stay home, respect his wishes," and "The dog knows best." Walter watched from his window, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his weathered face as he observed the unexpected support rallying around him. He placed his hand on Apollo's head, finding comfort in the warm fur of the companion who had stood by him since his wife Catherine's passing 3 years ago. Catherine had insisted on adopting Apollo from the local shelter just 6 months before. Her heart gave out, as if somehow knowing Walter would need the companionship. "Looks like it's us against the world, old boy," he murmured to Apollo, who responded with an understanding whine. Meanwhile, Meredith sat in her car around the corner, wiping frustrated tears from her eyes as she made phone calls. The situation had spiraled far beyond what she had anticipated. Her husband James had warned her that forcing her father into a care facility might backfire, but she had been so certain it was the right thing to do. The growing media circus only strengthened her resolve. Her father clearly wasn't capable of making sound decisions anymore. If he were, he wouldn't be causing such a public spectacle. What Meredith failed to recognize was that her father hadn't sought any of this attention. He simply wanted to remain in the home he had shared with Catherine for over 40 years, surrounded by memories and the comfort of familiar routines. As night fell, the protesters dispersed, but several neighbors took turns keeping watch from their porches, concerned that Meredith might return with reinforcements. Inside his home, Walter moved with careful precision through his evening routine, making sure to demonstrate to himself and to Apollo that he was perfectly capable of managing on his own. He prepared a simple dinner, took his medication, and settled into his favorite armchair with a dog-eared copy of Steinbeck's The Winter of Our Discontent, Apollo resting faithfully at his feet. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Judge Sandra Holbrook, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had known Walter for decades through the local historical society, knocked on his door. Apollo, recognizing her scent, allowed her passage with nothing more than a cautious sniff. "I saw the news, Walt," she said, declining his offer of tea as they sat in his meticulously organized living room. "Meredith has filed for emergency guardianship. The hearing is set for Monday." Walter's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his chair. "She thinks I'm losing my mind," he stated flatly. "Are you?" Sandra asked, direct as ever. Walter held her gaze steadily. "I forget things sometimes. Names, where I put things. I got turned around walking home from the grocery store last month. But I found my way back, I always do." Sandra nodded thoughtfully. "You'll need representation, someone to speak for your interests." "I can speak for myself," Walter insisted. "Not in court, you can't. Not effectively," Sandra countered. "This isn't a classroom, Walt. This is about your life, your autonomy." As Sandra left, promising to connect Walter with a lawyer who specialized in elder rights, the media presence outside his home had doubled. Vans from national networks now lined Maple Street, and reporters approached anyone who walked by, hungry for comments and context. Walter's phone rang incessantly with calls from old colleagues, former students and distant relatives who had seen the viral video or news reports. Apollo remained vigilant, growling at unfamiliar faces that came too close to the property, his protective instinct seemingly heightened by the growing chaos. By sundown, the story had evolved far beyond a simple family disagreement. Political pundits discussed elder rights and autonomy versus safety concerns. Medical experts debated the ethics of forced care. Animal behaviorists analyzed Apollo's protective stance. Lost in all the noise was the simple truth. An old man who wanted nothing more than to live out his remaining years with dignity in the home he loved, with the companion who understood him best. As Walter turned out the lights that night, the weight of the coming battle settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew Meredith believed she was acting out of love and concern, but he also knew that sometimes the people closest to us understand us the least. Apollo sensed his distress and rested his head on Walter's knee, those intelligent eyes looking up with unconditional devotion. "Whatever happens, boy," Walter whispered, running his fingers through Apollo's fur. "We face it together." Outside, the media vans kept their lights on, illuminating Maple Street with an unnatural glow, as Willowbrook held its collective breath, waiting to see what Monday's hearing would bring. Martin Whitaker's video spread across social media platforms with astonishing speed. By Saturday morning, less than 24 hours after he captured the standoff, the clip had amassed over 3 million views. National news outlets picked up the story, running segments with headlines like "Canine Guardian Angel" and "Four-legged Defender of Elderly Rights." The hashtag Jacques Apollo the Protector was trending nationwide. Walter, who had never owned a smartphone and maintained only a rarely checked email account for communicating with former students, remained largely unaware of his sudden fame. It wasn't until his neighbor, Eleanor Rodriguez, knocked on his door with a freshly baked apple pie and printouts of online articles that he began to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. "You're everywhere, Walt," Eleanor explained, spreading the printouts across his kitchen table while Apollo sniffed curiously at the pie. "People are calling Apollo a hero. There are memes, tribute videos, even a crowdfunding campaign to help with your legal expenses." Walter adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the articles with growing disbelief. "This is absurd," he muttered. "All I want is to be left alone in my own home." Eleanor patted his hand sympathetically. "That's exactly why people are rallying. Behind you, you represent something important, the right to age with dignity on your own terms." Outside, the media presence had transformed Maple Street into an impromptu press village. Satellite trucks lined the curbs, reporters conducted live broadcasts from Walter's sidewalk, and curious onlookers drove slowly past, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous dog and his elderly owner. The local police had assigned an officer to maintain order and ensure the media respected property boundaries. Officer Daniels, a young patrolman with a fondness for dogs, took special care to keep Walter's walkway clear, occasionally slipping Apollo treats through the fence when no cameras were watching. Meanwhile, across town in her spacious lakeside home, Meredith was experiencing a very different kind of attention. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, angry messages from strangers, concerned calls from friends, and emails from colleagues expressing various degrees of support or dismay. Her husband, James, found her sitting in their home office, staring blankly at her computer screen, where dozens of social media tabs displayed increasingly vitriolic comments about her actions. "They're calling me a monster," she whispered, not looking up as James placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "They're saying I'm trying to steal Dad's house, that I'm warehousing him for convenience, that I'm after his money." James sighed, heavily, closing the laptop lid. People love simple narratives, villains and heroes. They don't know the whole story. Meredith finally turned to face him, her eyes red-rimmed. "Do you think I'm wrong? That I should just let him stay there? Until something terrible happens?" James considered his words carefully. "I think you're scared, and with good reason. Your father is getting older, and after what happened with your mother..." Meredith flinched at the reference. Her mother, Elizabeth, had suffered a severe fall, while home alone 5 years earlier, lying helpless for hours before being discovered. Though she survived, the incident accelerated her decline, leading to a difficult 2-year period of nursing home care before her passing. The trauma of that experience haunted Meredith daily. "I can't go through that again," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't find him hurt or worse because he was too stubborn to accept help." James nodded understandingly. "Then maybe we need to find a middle ground, something that respects his independence but addresses your concerns." Meredith's phone rang again, her lawyer calling with updates about Monday's hearing. As she answered, James wandered to the window, gazing out at the peaceful lake view and wondering how their family had arrived at this painful impasse. Back on Maple Street, the protest in support of Walter had grown considerably. What began as a few neighbors with hastily made signs had evolved into a gathering of over 100 people, many bringing their own dogs in solidarity. Local pet rescue organizations arrived with adoptable German shepherds, using the opportunity to advocate for senior pet adoption. A food truck selling Apollo's Defenders hot dogs donated a portion of proceeds to elder rights organizations. The carnival-like atmosphere was not entirely welcome to Walter, who valued his privacy, but he recognized the strategic advantage of public support. The attorney Judge Sandra had recommended, a sharp-witted elder law specialist named Thomas Chen, arrived Saturday afternoon for their first consultation. Thomas navigated through the crowd with practiced ease, deflecting reporters' questions, with polite but firm no comments. Once inside Walter's living room, with Apollo keeping a watchful eye on the newcomer, Thomas got straight to business. "Judge Holbrook filled me in on the basics," he said, accepting the cup of coffee Walter offered. "But I need to hear everything from you, especially any incidents that might have prompted your daughter's concerns." Walter settled into his armchair with a sigh. "Meredith thinks I'm losing my faculties because I've had a few senior moments," he admitted. "I left a pot on the stove once and triggered the smoke alarm. I got disoriented walking home from Parker's Market during that heat wave last month. And yes, I sometimes forget names or where I put things." "That describes half the people I know, regardless of age," Thomas remarked, making notes. "Any medical diagnoses?" Walter hesitated. "My doctor mentioned mild cognitive impairment at my last checkup. Normal for my age," he said. But Meredith latched onto that like it was a terminal diagnosis. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need your medical records and possibly an independent evaluation before the hearing. But more importantly, I need to understand what you want." Walter's answer came without hesitation. "I want to stay in my home with Apollo for as long as I reasonably can." I taught literature to teenagers for 42 years. I know my limitations. If the day comes when I truly can't manage, I'll be the first to admit it. Thomas studied Walter's face, noting the clarity in his eyes and the coherence of his speech. Your case is straightforward from a legal perspective. You appear to have capacity to make your own decisions. But family matters rarely are simple in practice. What's your relationship with Meredith like, beyond this issue? The question opened a floodgate of complicated emotions for Walter. He spoke at length about his only child, her driven personality, her perfectionism, her tendency to control situations. He acknowledged the strain that had developed after his wife's passing, when he had declined Meredith's invitation to move closer to her family. She took it personally, Walter explained, as if I was rejecting her care rather than choosing my independence. As their conversation continued, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the front window, they could see a sleek black SUV attempting to navigate through the crowd. Inside was Meredith, looking increasingly distressed as protesters recognized her and began to cluster around her vehicle, some holding their signs against her windows. Officer Daniels moved quickly to disperse the crowd, allowing Meredith to park. Walter watched his daughters approach with a mixture of concern and apprehension. Apollo, sensing the tension, moved to stand between Walter and the door. Your defender is ready for battle, Thomas observed with a slight smile. Should I step out to give you privacy? Walter shook his head. I'd prefer you stay. Things haven't been productive between us lately. When the doorbell rang, Apollo's growl was immediate. Walter hushed him with a gentle command, then nodded for Thomas to open the door. Meredith entered with the wary steps of someone entering hostile territory. Her eyes darted from Walter to Thomas to Apollo, who maintained his protective stance, ears alert and eyes unblinking. I didn't know you had company, she said stiffly. I thought we could talk privately. Thomas is my attorney, Walter replied, gesturing for her to sit. Anything you want to say to me, you can say in front of him. Meredith remained standing, her posture rigid with tension. An attorney. Really, Dad? We're family. We should be able to work this out without turning it into a legal battle, Thomas interjected smoothly. Sometimes a neutral third party can help facilitate difficult conversations. I'm here to ensure Mr. Garrison's interests are represented, but that doesn't mean we can't find a solution that works for everyone. Meredith's expression remained skeptical, but she finally sat on the edge of the sofa, as far from Apollo as possible. The dog had never shown aggression toward her before, but the events of the past 2 days had clearly altered their dynamic. I came to try one more time to reason with you, she said, addressing her father directly. This circus outside, it's not helping anyone. If you'd just agreed to a 30-day evaluation at Pinecrest, we could avoid the hearing entirely. Walter's expression hardened. So I should surrender my autonomy to make your life easier? To stop the embarrassing publicity? To get you the help you need? Meredith's voice rose sharply, causing Apollo to take a step forward, his growl deepening. Walter placed a calming hand on the dog's back. I don't need the kind of help you're offering, Meredith. What I need is respect for my choices, even when you disagree with them. The tension in the room was palpable as father and daughter stared at each other across an emotional chasm that seemed to widen with each passing moment. Outside, the gathered crowd continued their vigil, unaware of the painful confrontation unfolding behind Walter's front door. A private struggle now playing out on a very public stage, with Monday's hearing looming like a storm on the horizon. Sunday dawned with a tension that hung over Willowbrook, like the fog that crept across the town's namesake stream. The morning news shows featured expert panels discussing elder rights, with Walter and Apollo's story as the central case study. Outside Walter's home, supporters had established a small encampment complete with tents, coolers, and handmade banners. Local businesses, sensing both opportunity and genuine concern, delivered coffee and pastries to the growing crowd. Inside, Walter sat at his kitchen table with Thomas Chen, reviewing their strategy for the following day's hearing. Apollo lay at Walter's feet, occasionally lifting his head when voices outside grew louder. Judge Montgomery is fair but conservative, Thomas explained, organizing documents into labeled folders. He'll want clear evidence that you're capable of independent living. Your medical records show nothing beyond normal age-related concerns, but Meredith's petition includes 3 specific incidents she's using to argue for guardianship. Walter nodded grimly. The smoke detector getting lost and the fall in the bathroom last winter. Yes, though the fall is particularly concerning to the court. You didn't tell anyone for 3 days. Walter's expression hardened. Because it wasn't serious. I slipped, bruised my hip and took it easy for a few days. If I'd called Meredith, she'd have had me in an ambulance before I finished the sentence. Thomas removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Walt, I need you to understand something. Your independence matters, but so does your safety. If we're going to convince the judge to rule in your favor, we need to acknowledge legitimate concerns and offer reasonable accommodations. Walter opened his mouth to protest, but Thomas continued. Not a care facility, but perhaps a home health aide. A few times a week, a medical alert system, maybe some home modifications. The suggestion hung in the air as Walter absently stroked Apollo's fur, his thoughts drifting to Catherine. She had always been the practical one, the mediator between his stubborn pride and Meredith's controlling tendencies. What would she advise now? After a long moment, he sighed. I suppose I'm not 20 anymore. Some reasonable accommodations might be acceptable. Thomas smiled, relieved. Good. Now, there's something else we need to discuss. I've been looking into Meredith's personal situation, and I found some concerning financial records. He slid a folder across the table. Her investment firm has been struggling. They've lost several major clients in the past year, and there have been rumors of improper fund management. Walter frowned, scanning the documents. What does this have to do with my case? Possibly nothing, Thomas admitted. But the timing of her petition coincides with a significant downturn in her company's fortunes. And your house, which you own outright, is worth considerable money in today's market, especially with that acre of lakefront property behind it. Walter's face darkened. You're suggesting Meredith wants me declared incompetent so she can sell my home? That's absurd. Whatever our differences, she wouldn't... His protest was interrupted by a knock at the back door. Thomas gathered the financial documents quickly, sliding them into his briefcase as Walter rose to answer. Eleanor Rodriguez stood on the porch, looking apologetic. Sorry to bother you, Walt, but there's someone here you might want to meet. She's been trying to get past the media circus all morning. Behind Eleanor stood a petite woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, she introduced herself. I'm a geriatric specialist at Burlington Medical Center. A former student of yours reached out, Michael. Prentice, he's one of our hospital administrators now. Walter's face brightened. Mickey Prentice? Good heavens, I haven't seen him since he graduated in '98. Brilliant boy, terrible at Shakespeare. Dr. Martinez smiled. He speaks very highly of you. When he saw your story on the news, he asked if I'd be willing to provide an independent assessment before your hearing. No charge, of course. Thomas, who had joined them at the door, looked suspicious. That's unusually generous. How do we know you're not working with Ms. Garrison Powell? You don't, Dr. Martinez replied frankly. But you're welcome to call Michael directly to verify. And Mr. Garrison can decline my assessment or choose not to submit it to the court if he's unsatisfied with the process. Walter studied her for a moment, then nodded. I have nothing to hide. Please come in. As Dr. Martinez conducted her evaluation, a series of cognitive tests, physical assessments, and conversation-based observations, Thomas made calls to verify her credentials and connection to Michael Prentice. Eleanor returned home, promising to bring lunch later. The assessment took nearly 2 hours, during which Apollo remained vigilant, watching the doctor's every move with attentive eyes. When Dr. Martinez finally packed away her equipment, her expression was thoughtful. Mr. Garrison, I'd like to speak frankly, she said, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. You're experiencing mild cognitive changes consistent with your age, but nothing that suggests you're unable to make decisions or live independently with proper support systems. I would recommend some home modifications. Grab bars in the bathroom, better lighting on the stairs, and perhaps a medical alert device, but institutionalization seems entirely unnecessary at this point. Walter felt a wave of relief, but Thomas remained professional. "Will you put that in writing for the court?" Dr. Martinez nodded. "I'll have my report ready by tomorrow morning, and I'm willing to testify if needed." After she left, Walter slumped in his chair, emotionally drained. "One hurdle down," Thomas said encouragingly. "Now we need to prepare for your testimony. The judge will want to hear directly from you." As they worked through potential questions, Walter's phone rang, a rare occurrence these days. The caller ID showed Meredith, and Walter hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Dad." Her voice sounded strained. "We need to talk. Alone. No lawyers, no protesters, no cameras. Just us." Walter glanced at Thomas, who nodded cautiously. "When?" "Tonight, after dark. I'll come to the back door so no one sees me." The call ended abruptly, leaving Walter staring at the phone with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Thomas looked concerned. That seemed cryptic. "She wants to talk privately," Walter explained. "Tonight." "I don't like it," Thomas frowned. "The timing is suspicious, right before the hearing. Whatever she says, make no promises, sign nothing." Walter nodded, though his thoughts were elsewhere. Despite everything, a part of him hoped this meant reconciliation, a chance to bridge the growing divide between them. Thomas left shortly after, promising to return early the next morning. The afternoon crawled by as Walter paced his home, rehearsing what he might say to Meredith. By evening, the media presence had diminished slightly as reporters filed their stories for the day. The protesters maintained their vigil, though in smaller numbers, many having gone home to prepare for work the next day. Walter declined Eleanor's dinner invitation, claiming fatigue. In truth, he wanted to be alone when Meredith arrived. As darkness fell, he sat in his dimly lit kitchen, Apollo at his feet, waiting. At precisely 9 o'clock, a soft knock came at the back door. Apollo's ears perked up, but he made no sound as Walter rose to answer. Meredith stood on the porch, looking exhausted. Gone was her usual polished appearance. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, her clothing casual. She looked more like the daughter Walter remembered from years ago, before success and ambition had reshaped her. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Walter stepped aside, allowing her entry. Apollo watched her warily but didn't growl. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where the family had shared countless meals in happier times. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Meredith broke the silence. "I found something today," she said, placing a small key on the table. "I was going through Mom's old jewelry box, looking for her pearl earrings to wear to court, and this was taped to the bottom with a note." Walter recognized the key immediately. It opened Catherine's private desk drawer, where she had kept her most personal belongings. What note? Meredith reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, Catherine's elegant handwriting immediately recognizable. "For Walter and Meredith, when you need it most," she read aloud. Her voice wavered. I think she knew this day might come." Walter felt a tightness in his chest. Catherine had always been 3 steps ahead, anticipating problems before they materialized. "Do you have the desk key with you?" he asked. Meredith nodded, producing a second key. Without another word, they moved to Catherine's writing desk in the corner of the living room, a beautiful cherry wood piece that had been her pride and joy. With reverent care, Walter unlocked the small drawer that had remained closed since Catherine's passing. Inside lay a sealed envelope addressed to both of them in Catherine's handwriting. Walter's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, unfolding several pages of neatly written text. As they read together, Catherine's voice seemed to fill the room. Wise, loving, and eerily prescient, she wrote of her fears that her passing would deepen the natural tensions between her husband and daughter, his stubborn independence, her controlling nature. She acknowledged that aging would eventually force difficult conversations and decisions, but most importantly, she reminded them both of what truly mattered, not where Walter lived, but how he lived, with dignity, purpose, and love. The letter continued, revealing that Catherine had made arrangements with a local service called Seniors at Home setting aside funds for part-time in-home care when Walter needed it. She had also researched graduated living options that would allow Walter to maintain independence while providing increasing support as needed. Everything had been arranged, waiting for the moment when both Walter and Meredith were ready to acknowledge the need. As they reached the letter's end, Meredith's tears fell freely. "She knew," she whispered. She knew exactly what would happen. Walter's own eyes were damp as he carefully refolded the letter. "Your mother always saw the whole picture while we were arguing over details." A heavy silence settled between them, filled with regret for the public spectacle their private struggle had become. Apollo, sensing the shift in mood, moved to rest his head on Walter's knee, offering comfort as he had countless times since Catherine's passing. Monday morning arrived with an unusual stillness over Willowbrook. The protesters outside Walter's home had grown overnight, their numbers bolstered by elder rights activists who had traveled from neighboring states after seeing the viral video. Local news reported that the courthouse steps were equally crowded, with demonstrators on both sides of the issue. Those supporting family intervention for safety versus those championing individual autonomy in aging. Walter stood before his bedroom mirror, carefully knotting his tie, a blue silk one that Catherine had given him for their 40th anniversary. His fingers moved with practiced precision, belying Meredith's claims of deteriorating motor skills. Apollo watched from the doorway, his intelligent eyes never leaving his master. "How do I look, old friend?" Walter asked, smoothing his silver hair. "Respectable enough to convince a judge I can tie my own shoes?" Apollo's tail thumped against the floor in what Walter chose to interpret as approval. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway drew Walter's attention. Through the window, he could see Thomas Chen's sedan, followed moments later by Dr. Martinez's vehicle. They had agreed to arrive early to avoid the media gauntlet that would undoubtedly form as the hearing time approached. Downstairs, Walter let them in through the back door. Thomas looked sharp in a charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase filled with their case materials. Dr. Martinez handed Walter a sealed envelope. "My assessment, as promised," she said. "I've included my contact information if the judge has questions. I'll be at the hospital this morning, but can come to court if necessary." Walter thanked her sincerely, then turned to Thomas. "Any word from Meredith?" After their emotional discovery of Catherine's letter the previous night, Meredith had left, with promises to reconsider her position, but no definitive commitment to withdraw her petition. Thomas shook his head. "Nothing yet. We should prepare as if the hearing is proceeding." As they reviewed their strategy one final time, Walter felt a curious calm settle over him. Catherine's posthumous intervention had provided not just practical solutions, but a profound reminder that he was never as alone as he sometimes felt. Whatever happened today, he knew her wisdom would guide them toward the right path. At precisely 9:30, they departed for the courthouse. Thomas had arranged for a side entrance to avoid the media, but word of their arrival spread quickly. As they walked the courthouse corridor toward the designated hearing room, Walter was surprised to see Michael Prentice, no longer the gangly teenager who had struggled with Hamlet, but a distinguished man in his 40s, waiting outside the door. "Mr. Garrison," he said warmly, extending his hand, "it's been too long." Walter smiled, genuinely touched. "Mickey Prentice, you've done well for yourself, I see." Michael nodded. "Thanks to teachers like you who believed in me. I've got a statement from 15 of your former students who are now healthcare professionals, all testifying to your continued mental acuity based on your correspondence with them." Thomas accepted the document gratefully, adding it to their growing file of supporting evidence. Inside the hearing room, Walter was surprised to find it relatively small and intimate, not the imposing courtroom he had imagined. Judge Montgomery, a stern-faced man with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for fairness, presided from a simple desk, rather than an elevated bench. Meredith was already seated with her attorney, a polished woman named Victoria Winters, whose reputation for aggressive elder law litigation preceded her. Notably absent was James, Meredith's husband, whose gentle pragmatism might have been a moderating influence. The small gallery was filled with a carefully selected few, Eleanor Rodriguez representing the neighbors, Officer Daniels in his dress uniform, and several others who had become supporting characters in Walter's unexpected drama. Conspicuously missing was Apollo, who had been left at home despite Walter's protests. The court didn't allow animals unless they were service dogs with proper certification. Judge Montgomery called the hearing to order with minimal ceremony. "This is a closed proceeding regarding the petition for guardianship in the matter of Walter Garrison," he announced. "I'll remind everyone that while this case has garnered significant public attention, what happens in this room is about one thing only: determining Mr. Garrison's capacity to manage his own affairs and whether intervention is necessary for his safety and well-being." Victoria Winters presented Meredith's case first, painting a picture of a devoted daughter concerned about her father's declining abilities. She detailed the incidents outlined in the petition: the cooking accident, Walter's disorientation in the neighborhood, the unreported fall, and introduced additional concerns about medication management and financial decision-making. Ms. Garrison Powell's actions are motivated solely by love and concern, Winters concluded. She seeks temporary guardianship, not to restrict her father's freedom, but to ensure proper evaluation and care planning in a safe environment. Thomas Chen's presentation offered a stark contrast. He introduced Dr. Martinez's assessment, Michael, Prentice's statement from former students, and testimonials from neighbors regarding Walter's daily activities and social engagement. Most compelling was Walter's own medical history, which showed regular checkups, medication compliance, and a doctor's notes describing him as remarkably robust for his age. "What we have here," Thomas argued, "is not a case of incapacity, but a disagreement about risk tolerance. Mr. Garrison acknowledges he's aging and accepts reasonable accommodations. What he rejects is surrendering his autonomy based on isolated incidents that have been exaggerated to justify intervention." When it came time for testimony, Walter spoke clearly and directly, answering Judge Montgomery's questions with thoughtful consideration. "Yes, Your Honor, I sometimes forget things. Yes, I had a fall and perhaps should have sought medical attention, but these are normal parts of aging, not signs of incompetence. I've lived independently since my wife's passing 3 years ago, managing my home, my finances, and my health care with minimal assistance." Judge Montgomery studied him carefully. "And what about safety concerns? Your daughter's petition mentions leaving the stove on, getting lost in your neighborhood." Walter nodded acknowledgement. "I left a pot of water boiling once when the phone rang, hardly unusual at any age. As for getting disoriented, it happened during a heat advisory when temperatures exceeded 95 degrees. I recognized my confusion, sat down in the shade, and collected myself before continuing home." When asked about his plans for addressing legitimate aging concerns, Walter surprised everyone by producing Catherine's letter. "My late wife anticipated this day," he explained, requesting permission to enter the letter as evidence. "She arranged for graduated support services that both preserve my independence and address safety concerns." Judge Montgomery read the letter carefully, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. When Meredith took the stand, the emotional weight of the proceedings was evident in her voice. "I love my father," she began, her composure cracking slightly. "After losing Mom, the thought of something happening to him while he's alone." She paused, collecting herself. "Maybe I overreacted to certain incidents. Maybe I was trying to prevent a tragedy before it happened. But I never intended for things to escalate this way." Judge Montgomery asked pointed questions about her familiarity with the resources Catherine had arranged. Meredith admitted she hadn't known about them until the previous night. "Would those services address your primary concerns about your father's safety?" the judge pressed. Meredith hesitated, then nodded slowly. "They might. I need time to review them properly." After both sides presented closing arguments, Judge Montgomery called a brief recess to consider his ruling. Walter and Meredith sat on opposite sides of the room, the distance between them feeling both physical and emotional. Thomas whispered encouraging words about their strong presentation, but Walter's attention was fixed on his daughter, who looked smaller somehow, burdened by the public scrutiny their private struggle had attracted. When Judge Montgomery returned, the room fell silent. He adjusted his glasses, reviewing his notes one final time before speaking. Guardianship proceedings require balancing two vital interests: the safety and well-being of the individual and the fundamental right to self-determination. The court must have clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Garrison lacks capacity to make reasonable decisions about his own care before removing his autonomy, even temporarily. He looked directly at Walter. Based on the evidence presented, including medical assessments, witness testimony, and Mr. Garrison's own coherent self-advocacy, I find insufficient grounds to grant the guardianship petition. Relief washed over Walter's face as the judge continued. However, I acknowledge Ms. Garrison Powell's legitimate concerns about her father's safety as he ages. Therefore, I am ordering the implementation of the support services outlined in Catherine Garrison's letter, with quarterly reports, to the court for the first year to ensure adequacy. He turned to Meredith. Ms. Garrison Powell, your concern for your father is commendable, but protection must not come at the cost of dignity and self-determination when less restrictive alternatives exist. With a final tap of his gavel, it was over. Walter had won the right to remain in his home, with appropriate supports in place to address legitimate safety concerns. The courtroom erupted in hushed conversations as Judge Montgomery gathered his papers and exited. Thomas shook Walter's hand firmly. Congratulations. This is the best outcome we could have hoped for. Walter nodded, but his eyes were on Meredith, who sat motionless at her table as her attorney whispered urgently in her ear. After a moment's hesitation, Walter crossed the room, stopping before his daughter. Meredith, he said gently. She looked up, her expression unreadable. You won, congratulations. Walter shook his head. No one won or lost today. Your mother won. By thinking ahead and finding a middle path, we were too stubborn to see for ourselves. For a long moment, Meredith said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, she stood. I need time, she said quietly. This has been a lot. Walter nodded, understanding. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As they exited the courtroom through separate doors, Walter with Thomas through a side entrance to avoid the media, Meredith through the main doors where cameras waited, both knew that while the legal battle was resolved, the emotional reconciliation had only just begun. Walter's thoughts turned to Apollo, waiting faithfully at home, unaware that his protective stance had catalyzed a sequence of events that would reshape their lives in ways none could have predicted. News of the court's decision spread through Willowbrook with the speed of summer lightning. By the time Walter arrived home, the crowd outside his house had grown into an impromptu celebration. Neighbors brought food, local musicians played folk songs on the lawn, and several elderly residents held signs reading, "Walter won one for all of us." Apollo, who had been looked after by Eleanor during the hearing, burst through the front door the moment Walter entered, nearly knocking him over in a display of unbridled joy. The dog circled and jumped, whining with happiness as Walter knelt to embrace him. Yes, boy, we did it, Walter murmured into Apollo's fur. We're staying home. The reunion was captured by several onlookers and quickly joined the multitude of Apollo videos already circulating online. News outlets from across the country ran the footage alongside headlines proclaiming "Justice sides with elderly man and loyal dog," and canine guardians vigil rewarded. Animal protection organizations seized the moment, launching adoption campaigns for senior dogs with slogans like "Find your Apollo, loyalty has no age limit." For Walter, who had never sought publicity, the attention was overwhelming. He retreated inside with Apollo, allowing Thomas to handle the press statements. The attorney skillfully emphasized the balanced nature of the court's decision, acknowledging legitimate aging concerns while preserving Walter's autonomy. This case was never about winning or losing, Thomas told the assembled reporters. It was about finding the right balance between safety and independence, concern and control. Today's ruling affirms that aging doesn't automatically diminish one's right to self-determination. Missing from the celebration was Meredith. After the hearing, she had driven directly to her lake house turning off her phone and withdrawing from both social media and public view. James had joined her there, providing a buffer between his wife and the outside world as she processed the complex emotions of the past few days. Walter respected her need for space, though he worried about the path to reconciliation. Catherine's letter had offered practical solutions, but couldn't heal the wounded trust between father and daughter. That evening, as the impromptu celebration finally dispersed and quiet returned to Maple Street, Walter sat on his porch with Apollo beside him, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. Eleanor brought over a plate of dinner and sat with him for a while, her companionable silence more comforting than words. "They'll be talking about this in Willowbrook for years," she finally said, gesturing toward the departing neighbors. "You and Apollo are local celebrities now." Walter chuckled softly. "Fame was never on my bucket list. All I wanted was to stay in my home with my dog." "Sometimes the quietest desires speak the loudest," Eleanor replied thoughtfully. "Your stand meant something to people, especially us older folks who worry about losing control of our lives someday." After Eleanor left, Walter remained on the porch until stars filled the Vermont sky. He thought about Catherine, imagining her gentle amusement at how their private family matter had become a public spectacle. She would have found the perfect words to bring him and Meredith back together, to help them understand each other's fears and motivations. Without her mediation, the path forward seemed uncertain. The implementation of Catherine's arrangements began the very next day. A representative from Seniors at Home arrived to assess the house for safety modifications, grab bars in the bathroom, better lighting on the stairs, a ramp beside the back steps. A medical alert pendant was set up, though Walter grumbled about wearing it. Most significantly, a part-time aide named Sarah was scheduled to visit 3 mornings each week to assist with housekeeping, medication management, and transportation to appointments. Apollo regarded these changes with cautious acceptance, especially warming to Sarah after she produced a pocket full of premium dog treats during her initial visit. "Your protector is evaluating me," she laughed as Apollo sniffed her thoroughly. "I consider myself honored to have passed inspection." Walter found himself surprisingly comfortable with the new arrangements. There was relief in acknowledging that some tasks had become more challenging with age, and accepting help didn't feel like surrender when it was on his own terms. The media interest gradually waned as newer stories captured public attention, though Apollo's fan club remained active online, sharing updates and organizing fundraisers for senior pet adoption. Walter declined most interview requests, but agreed to a brief statement for a documentary about elder rights, feeling that their experience might help others navigate similar challenges. 3 weeks after the hearing, as Walter and Apollo enjoyed their evening walk through the neighborhood, now a supervised activity with Sarah accompanying them, a familiar car turned onto Maple Street. Walter's heart quickened as he recognized Meredith's silver sedan approaching slowly. She parked at the curb and remained inside for several moments, seemingly gathering courage before emerging. Sarah, sensing the significance of the moment, quietly excused herself with a promise to return the following morning. Apollo, however, showed no inclination to leave Walter's side as Meredith approached, though his posture lacked the defensive tension of their previous encounters. "Dad?" she said simply, her voice carrying equal measures of uncertainty and hope. "Meredith," Walter responded, gesturing toward the porch. "Would you like to sit?" They settled into the wicker chairs where the family had spent countless summer evenings in happier times. Apollo positioned himself at Walter's feet, watchful but calm. The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken words and complicated emotions. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Meredith finally began. "About Mom, about you, about why I reacted the way I did." She gazed out at the darkening street, gathering her thoughts. "After Mom's fall, I promised myself I wouldn't let something like that happen to you. I was so focused on preventing another crisis that I couldn't see how my help felt like control." Walter nodded slowly. "And I was so determined to maintain my independence that I minimized legitimate concerns. We're both stubborn, Meredith. You come by it honestly." A ghost of a smile crossed Meredith's face. "James says the same thing. He's been patient through all of this. She hesitated, then continued. I want you to know I've been meeting with a therapist. She's helping me understand that my fear of losing you got tangled up with my grief over Mom. I thought I could keep you safe by controlling everything. But that's not how life works, is it? No, Walter agreed softly. Life's messy and unpredictable, no matter how carefully we plan. He reached out, tentatively placing his hand over hers. Your mother knew that better than either of us. That's why she left us a middle path. Meredith turned her hand to clasp his. I've been reviewing the services she arranged. They're exactly what's needed. Not too much, not too little. She shook her head in wonder. Even after she's gone, she's still taking care of us both. Their conversation continued as twilight deepened into night, moving from the porch to the living room when the evening chill set in. They spoke of Catherine, of grief, of fears and misunderstandings. They acknowledged past hurts without assigning blame. Most importantly, they began to forge a new understanding, one based on mutual respect rather than power struggles. When Meredith finally prepared to leave, she knelt to address Apollo directly. Thank you for protecting him, she said, offering her hand palm up in a gesture of peace. I understand now what you knew all along. Apollo studied her for a long moment before gently placing his paw in her hand, the simple gesture bringing tears to both Walter and Meredith's eyes. He always had good judgment, Walter said, his voice thick with emotion. Just like his namesake, wisdom beyond mere mortals. In the weeks that followed, their reconciliation continued to strengthen. Meredith joined Walter for Sunday dinners, sometimes bringing James and their teenage children, rebuilding family connections that had frayed since Catherine's passing. She respected the boundaries established by the court, but found meaningful ways to participate in her father's care, researching senior programs at the local community center, helping Apollo get certified as an official therapy dog, even occasionally filling in for Sarah when the aide needed time off. The viral nature of their story had unexpected long-term effects. Elder rights organizations cited the case in advocacy materials. Legal journals published articles analyzing Judge Montgomery's balanced ruling. A local playwright even created a one-act drama inspired by Apollo's Protective Stand, which was performed at the Willowbrook Community Theater to sold-out audiences. Most significantly, the state legislature began considering a Walters Law that would require courts to explore graduated support options before approving guardianship petitions for seniors. On the one-year anniversary of the hearing, a small gathering assembled in Walter's backyard. Eleanor brought her famous apple pie, Thomas Chen arrived with his wife and children, Sarah joined them after her morning shift, and Meredith's family completed the circle. Apollo, now sporting a distinguished touch of grey around his muzzle, moved contentedly among the guests, accepting affection and treats with equal enthusiasm. As twilight approached, Walter raised a glass in toast. To Catherine, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. Who knew better than anyone that love means both protecting and letting go? To Mom, Meredith echoed, standing beside her father with her own glass raised. Who taught us that the heart's wisdom often exceeds our cleverest plans? Later, as stars appeared in the Vermont sky and conversation flowed around him, Walter watched Apollo settle at his feet with a contented sigh. The past year had brought challenges he never anticipated and resolution he hadn't dared hope for. His home remained his sanctuary, his autonomy preserved, his relationship with Meredith healing in ways that honored Catherine's memory. As if sensing his reflections, Apollo lifted his head, those intelligent eyes meeting Walter's with unmistakable devotion. Walter reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears, feeling profound gratitude for the faithful companion whose protective instinct had catalyzed not just a viral moment or court victory, but a deeper understanding of what it means to truly care for those we love. You were right all along, weren't you, boy? Walter murmured. Sometimes the wisest voice in the room belongs to the one who never speaks. Apollo's tail thumped against the grass in what Walter chose to interpret as agreement, a simple affirmation of a truth both profound and elemental, that protecting those we love sometimes means standing guard at the gate. and sometimes means letting them find their own way home. The evening continued as fireflies began to illuminate the garden, nature's own celebration of a family reunited, a battle resolved, and the quiet triumph of wisdom over fear. Walter looked around at the gathered faces, each representing a chapter, and their unexpected journey, and felt Catherine's presence in every laugh, every shared memory, every moment of connection. She had prepared them for this day, trusting that they would eventually find their way back to what mattered most.